With Mike Conley getting traded to Utah, the grit and grind era in Memphis has finally ended, after nearly a decade of persistence and hard work with unfortunately no championships to their name. In this video, we're going to look at this entire Grizzlies era and how they got their name. Why were they not able to get over the hump? Was there anything they could have done differently? How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today I'm going to answer all of those questions. Let's talk about the grit and grind era in Memphis. Now, first, how did the nickname first come about? And when did this era actually start? Well, that's hard to say. All the way back in 2007, they already had guys like Mike Conley and Rudy Gay. By 2009, they got Marc Gasol, who came over from Spain. Also in 2009, they made a trade to acquire Zach Randolph from the LA Clippers, which was low-key one of the greatest trades in recent history. All the Grizzlies had to do was give up Quentin Richardson, and they got back a perennial 20-10 player. Looking back, this was straight-up robbery, but back then, Randolph did not have the best reputation, and that's why his value was so low despite being incredibly talented. So now, they've got their core four: Gay, Conley, Gasol, and Randolph. But it wasn't until the 2010 offseason when they really became known as grit and grind. That was when they signed Tony Allen. And throughout the course of the 2010-11 season, you started to see signs pop up in the crowd. You started to see reporters and fans call this team grit and grind, a slow-paced team that hounded their opponents on defense, as the Grizzlies finished with a winning record for the first time since they traded away Pau Gasol. Basketball in Memphis was back, and it matched the city's style of blue-collar work ethic, so the name grit and grind stuck around for a long time. It was a perfect match for the team's style of play and a great way to represent the city's lifestyle. Later on, by the end of the 2010-11 season, they finished with 46 wins, grabbing the 8th seed in the Western Conference. In the first round, they would face the San Antonio Spurs, who, of course, were still one of the best teams in the league. However, at this point, the Spurs were weaker than most of their other iterations of this team. This season was right before they got Kawhi, and their big three of Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker looked like they were going downhill. Ginobili especially, who had an elbow injury near the end of the season, and Duncan looked as slow as ever. As a result, the younger Grizzlies were able to take advantage of this matchup and win the series in 6 games, even with their second leading scorer, Rudy Gay, injured. This was an extraordinary feat, which kickstarted this era and brought a lot more basketball hype to Memphis. Unfortunately, after a tough 7-game series, the Grizzlies almost won, but lost to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Despite the disappointing loss, this was considered a successful season by the organization and the players. In fact, this year was the first time they got out of the first round in the history of the franchise, even going all the way back to Vancouver. In the following season, the Grizzlies would build upon their success and continue to win. They finished the lockout-shortened season with a 41-25 record and made some major changes along the way. One of their main weaknesses was their bench, and they needed to fix that. So they acquired guys like Maurice Spates, Quincy Pondexter, and Dante Cunningham, 3 players who provided scoring off the bench but also matched the team's rugged identity. They also moved OJ Mayo to a full-time bench position, with Tony Allen now being the full-time starter. This kind of upset Mayo because before the Grizzlies moved into a different direction, Mayo was on his way to becoming the face of the team. But after a great first 2 years, he dropped off significantly, and his relationship with the organization slowly waned. Going into the 2012 playoffs, the Grizzlies had high expectations. Some believed they were legit contenders, and on paper, it looked like their team improved drastically compared to last season. In the first round, they were favored over the LA Clippers, and through most of Game 1, it certainly looked that way. But in the fourth quarter, the Grizzlies blew one of the biggest leads ever. The Clippers rallied from 27 down to win the game. At the time that this happened, it was the second biggest playoff comeback in NBA history. It was a demoralizing loss, but the Grizzlies bounced back quite nicely, forcing a Game 7. But then in Game 7, they would score just 72 points on their home floor and lose the series. While the Grizzlies did have some health issues, especially with Zach Randolph, it was still a disappointing defeat. And the early problems with this Grizzlies team started to show, mainly their lack of offense. In the following season, they realized that they needed to make a change. Rudy Gay, despite being a borderline star and a good shot creator, he was starting to become very inefficient. In the 2012-13 season, he played 42 games with the Grizzlies before he got traded. In those games, he averaged 17 points on 40% shooting with an abysmal 48% true shooting percentage, about 6% lower than the league average. Additionally, he was taking over 16 shots a game, about 3 shots more than the second highest on his team, which was Zach Randolph. The organization noticed that this was happening, and even though Rudy was one of the few shot creators they had, they felt it was better off if his shots went to other players on the team, for guys like Conley and Gasol. So at the 2013 trade deadline, the Grizzlies traded him away to Toronto. Afterwards, their offense got slightly better, but more importantly, their style of play changed a lot too. With Gay on the roster before, they were a slow team, but they weren't that slow, around the middle of the pack in pace. For comparison, in the 2011-12 season, they were the 18th slowest team in the league, and 7th best defensive team. Now they became the slowest team in the league with the 2nd best defensive rating. Their offense jumped slightly from 19th to 17th, but it was still below average. The 2013 Grizzlies would win a whopping 56 games, and were once again in the conversation as dark horse contenders. This team made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals, where they would get swept by the Spurs. While it was a successful season, this series exposed the Grizzlies' biggest weaknesses. They legit had no perimeter threats, and Mike Conley, back then he wasn't as good, and Tony Parker utterly destroyed him. The Spurs' game plan was quite simple, and that was to pack the paint with as many bodies and arms as they can. Guys like Thiago Splitter, Matt Bonner, Boris Diaw, sometimes Kawhi Leonard, and of course Tim Duncan. Zach Randolph, who killed the Spurs in the series 2 years prior, was held to just 11 points on an abysmal 30% from the field. Having very little outside threats will not win you the championship, and over the years, that's a problem the Grizzlies would not be able to fix. Afterwards, injuries started to pile up, and after 2013, the Grizzlies never had a healthy season. They would still win 50 games the following year, but would lose another tough 7-game series against OKC. They almost got them though. And then the year after that, the Grizzlies bounced back, winning 55 games. But this time they would lose to the new kids on the block. The Warriors would start their streak of consecutive finals appearances at this time and became the new dominant force in the league. They faced off in the second round, with the Grizzlies having an injured Mike Conley. Unfortunately, they could not match the offensive firepower of the Warriors, and they fell in 6 games. That's the thing, while the Grizzlies remained as a top 3 defensive team, their offense was always average or below average. If they fell behind in a game by like 15 or 20 points, there was no way they could come back from that deficit. On the other hand, teams like the Warriors or Clippers, and later on the Spurs, they had the offensive firepower to do that. Anyway, the following season was the worst when it came to injuries. In 2015-16, throughout the year, the Grizzlies had 28 different players suit up in a Grizzlies jersey. Towards the end of the year, the injuries were catastrophic. They still miraculously made the playoffs though, but to put it into perspective, Matt Barnes led the team in total minutes played in the playoffs. That's how short-handed they were. No Gasol, no Conley, Vince Carter and Jordan Farmar were starting in the backcourt. Yeah, it was pretty bad. The next year wasn't much better. They were healthier, but also older, and it was, in my opinion, the last full season of this grit and grind era. They would once again lose to the Spurs in the first round. Then Randolph and Allen would both leave the team near the end of 2017. Then the Grizzlies dropped to the bottom of the standings, and Conley and Gasol would be gone in the next 2 years. And that sums up this era of Grizzlies basketball. Why were they not able to get over the hump? Well, it's because their lack of offense really hurt them in an era where offensive efficiency became really important. They were never able to sign good three-point shooters who can space the floor, so their big men would always get suffocated down low. While they were a great team that played cohesively, it was easy to stop them once teams figured out their game plan. What they really needed was better outside threats. Besides Conley, they didn't have anybody who could consistently attack the rim and create plays. Even after 7 years, they were still not able to fill in the gaps. They were never able to sign a major free agent, and their playstyle remained stagnant for a long time. Well, they did sign Chandler Parsons, but let's not talk about that. Anyway, that's all folks. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and let me know your thoughts on this era. Do you think the Grizz had a legit shot to win the title in any year? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time.